All right, it's the B Block Podcast. Brandon Scott here, hosting with you. I want to shout out Foolish Club Media and the partnership. Make sure that you are subscribed to the B Block Podcast and to Foolish Club Media, wherever it is that you get your podcast. You can also find us on YouTube as well. I'm actually really excited about this episode because I'm bringing in what, at least to me, is, or it should be, a Houston sports fan favorite. My guy, Chancellor Johnson, who is, I would say, Chancellor Johnson of KPRC, Channel 2, NBC affiliate fame, but currently a free agent and marching to the beat of his own drum, which we can all respect and appreciate. Chance, I appreciate you for being here with me, man. But I want to jump right into it because we're coming here doing this podcast on the heels of the Warriors punching their ticket into the playoffs and their right to play the Houston Rockets in the first round in the 2 seed, 7 seed matchup, which is going to start on Sunday. Mm-hmm. But before we get into sort of your reaction to what you saw from the Warriors last night against, or say Tuesday night against the Memphis Grizzlies, and before we get into this matchup, I'm curious of how you, as somebody that's been covering the team for a couple of years now and obviously rooted in the area as well, how you feel about this moment for the Rockets. Like, here we are. Like, how would you describe this? The Rockets back in the playoffs for the first time since the bubble, facing a familiar foe for the fan base, but still with a totally different team and a different look and a different energy. And then after all of what it took for them to get here, a long path to get here, how would you describe this moment for the Rockets right now?
Yeah, man. First off, thanks for having me on. You know what? The best way I can describe it is, like LeBron James said, it's about damn time, right? We look at the Houston Rockets, who, shout out to Rafael Stone and Tillman Fertitta for starters, committing to a rebuild, something that a lot of teams around the league have struggled to do. They committed to it and they saw it through, right? Tanking, and building up their roster through the draft. And then when it was time to move on from their early, their youth, they were able to add on some veterans to help boost this team to what we see right now. And so, look, I was there for the John Wall days when it was Steven Silas coaching them up, and they were just out there, just as Russell Westbrook would say, running around doing cardio. Like, it was a train wreck. And his first 2 years here, where it was just, they were one of the, if not the worst team in the association. And here they are, a couple years later, as they transition from their super youth movement and brought in some free agents. They also brought in a guy who's a candidate to be, the coach of the year in Ime Udoka. And the jump that they had in his first year, I believe, was 20 games and getting to be 500 on the season to where they are right now, the second best team in the West. It's definitely been a long time coming for this team, and it's been really fun watching the development of guys and seeing how they did it. If you want to call it the right way, like I said, as far as setting their rebuild, getting the guys necessary that they would need, some blue chip type prospects, and here they are, and fittingly taking on the team that made them start the rebuild, the Golden State Warriors, with similar players that we saw from back during the Harden days.
Hey, right way or wrong way, it's working. Like, it's working. Like, you mentioned the turnaround last year, and it's the one that's not going to get talked about a lot because, they didn't make the playoffs. They didn't even make the play-in, but they got to 500, and it was the biggest turnaround in the league last year. Like, from year to year, their improvement record-wise was the best in the league last year when they didn't make the playoffs or the play-in. And then this year, you're talking about them being one of the surprises of the entire league. So they do deserve a lot of credit. And then also, I point out, Chance, in between the biggest turnaround and then what we're talking about right now, they also fit in what has turned out to be a really ballsy and savvy move in betting against the Phoenix Suns' future and the way that their season has imploded. And you and I were around to watch them play the Suns and kind of just observe a little bit from afar, but also kind of up close, of how strange of a situation that was for the amount of talent that they had as a team versus what they were able to actually produce. And for the Rockets to sort of bet on that, or in this case, bet against that, and to be able to now have the Suns' future to dangle in front of them. And I talked about this on the a previous episode of this podcast, but to be able to dance on the grave of the Suns, not to look away from your own paper, but think about it, Chance, man, they're in a position now where they don't need Kevin Durant. They don't need Devin Booker, but they are so perfectly situated to acquire one of those guys if they so choose, to where they can kind of just, it's almost like pick your poison, or pick your method of madness of how you want to go about improving this team from here. And a lot of that, I think, is going to depend on what we watch in these coming weeks.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because when you said they don't need a Devin Booker or Kevin Durant, I'm like, we might be a little too early, because to me that all depends on what happens and unfolds over the next couple of weeks. Because say they are able to take down the Warriors and they're able to move on, and let's just say they're competitive, if not advance to potentially a Western Conference Finals, then you can look at this and say, and if they are able to do that, then Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, in order for them to reach to that type of height, they have to have shown you something. They don't get there by Tari Eason and Fred Van on the backs of Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, right? It's going to take their young core, the guys that they just extended over this past offseason, to help get them there. But if they don't, if they run into this Warriors team and they're outlasted because simply they just don't have enough firepower, and say they get bounced in 6 games, and it was they just don't show you enough, then I don't know. They might look at this roster and say, hey, listen, we know there are certain building block guys that we really want to build around, and maybe they look, we would love to continue to build around the core group that we have here. There's a reason why they won so many games of their second best team in the West. But if they're ousted, in a fairly easy fashion against the Warriors, they could say, look, the regular season is cool, but we're here to win games in the postseason. And Ime Udoka certainly has not shied away from that. So we'll see, as far as the need for a potential superstar, proven type talent like a Kevin Durant. I'll even, if you want to count Devin Booker, I was high on the Devin Booker train earlier on. Not so much this year, because especially if you're talking about if you get Devin Booker, you have to move off of Jalen Green, and unless Jalen Green just has a stinker, I don't know if I might just sit on him, but there's an opportunity to where maybe they go get a Kevin Durant without having to touch LP or Jalen Green with those picks, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I think really the beauty of it all, and the charm of this season, is the fact that reasonable minds can sit on separate sides of this and say and make reasonable arguments and cases for going either way. Like the point, I think that what you're saying is correct, that based off of how the playoffs play out for the Rockets, that could determine how much or whether or not they feel like they need somebody, let's say, like Kevin Durant, for example. But also they could look at it, let's say they flame out, but take into consideration the improvement that they have made from year to year and the youth of their players, right? The core of their players, and just say, I mean, you could look at this and say, I'm making excuses, but they could also look at it and say, hey, man, we just had young guys in the playoffs and we need to ride this wave. Like we had as I just mentioned, the best turnaround in the league 2 seasons ago. We are one of the surprises of the NBA the next season. Who's to say what we can't be and what steps we can't make in the season after that without blowing any of this up? And maybe that pick that we would dangle in front of the Suns is one that we might be interested in ourselves. Maybe what if we don't necessarily believe that we have that guy, but we get the pick that makes us think we can get that guy now, right? The way, like with each class, a different sort of outcome has emerged between Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. Then you go Jabari Smith Jr., who is, and we'll get to him in a little bit, because he has emerged as like a star in his role type of guy, potentially type of guy, even if he's not going to necessarily be a star. And then Amen Thompson, you look up, could arguably be their most valuable player in a lot of ways. And so who's to say, like if you thought it was the end all be all when they drafted Jalen Green number 2 overall, oh, but wait, or Reed Shepard number 3 overall last year. Oh, but wait. So like, there's just so many. The point in this kind of rant here is the optionality here, and where they could just let what they have continue to brew, or punch the button and say, you know what, the only thing that we're missing right now is a dude that can close out a game or who we can just lean on a given night, especially when the playoffs roll around. Now that we know we're a playoff caliber team for sure, we just go get Kevin Durant. It's a lot of really good options in front of him.
Yeah, to me, and that's the interesting thing about it too, is like the value, right? Like if you, it seems like the writing's on the wall. And let's stick with the two examples we gave so far. It seemed like they maybe could be an option. If you are to go get a Devin Booker, he's going to be more expensive than Kevin Durant. Like if you get Devin Booker, you're gonna have to cough up something a little bit more than what you would with KD. Like with maybe it's the couple of picks, and you dangle in some salary filler with maybe a Dylan Brooks potentially. And which it was funny, like earlier this year when you said that, it was like, shoot, you can have Dylan Brooks. Now it's like, Dylan Brooks is a valuable member of this roster, right? Like he's a guy who adds, is crazy considering how he got here, and Memphis saying good riddance. Like literally, we want nothing to do with you. And now he is a plus starter, not just for the Rockets, but around the league. He's a guy who can start really on any team that needs a veteran wing player. And so he's going to have some value in this series on both ends. They're going to need him to make shots, but they're also going to need him to defend. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. But yeah, like it's the options are endless. And one thing, because I know we won't talk about him as we move forward, is I find it very, very fascinating. And it's my Brian Windhorst. I don't know how he did it, right? It's like two things in the air where it's like there's a lot of reports nationally coming out about how in love the Rockets are with Reed Shepherd. Like, to me, it's not lost on me about, like, there's a number of reports about, hey, man, look, this team is good now, but they're really, really high on Reed Shepherd. Why is that, right? Because if this is almost like a red shirt year for him. But what if, like, and we've seen some of the flashes in the minutes that he was able to get later on in the season. And to me, the thing that stands out to me, the two biggest things that he has to work on is buddy, get in the weight room, right? Eat you a bunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches all off season and lift a bunch of weights. And I like to see him turn his aggressiveness up. But the talent and the skill is there. And what if he's the missing piece that, maybe you give him a half a season to catch up and be a guy who can provide real value for you? Like, that's something that intrigues me, but and that's why it would be really interesting to see if they can get past the Warriors and just let this thing bake a little bit more. What can this team be? And clearly they've shown patience throughout this rebuild, but how patient will they be if they don't get the results that they want during this postseason?
Yeah, man, I'm with you there on Reed, man. A lot of ability there, a lot of skill and potential there, but Buddy is my size, and that's not gonna get it done. But Buddy is looking really thin, and that's not gonna get it done. But we've seen that before. Like, talk about you and I both being around through the years now. Saw Jalen Green coming there looking like, thin as a rail, and he's still pretty thin. But sometimes it's just a matter of your body filling out. Same thing with Jabari Smith, who's probably going to be skinny forever. But to his credit, is one of those who like is skinny but not soft. And so it's not going to back down just because he's skinny. So, you're going to have a little bit of that, and that's just going to be, a matter of time. So I'm definitely with you there. Before we get into this matchup between the Rockets and the Warriors, and I do want to hear what you thought about how the Warriors pulled off that game Tuesday night. It felt like the Grizzlies had so many chances, and still Jimmy Butler, playoff Jimmy, as he's so-called, he was brilliant. So was Steph in the fourth quarter. I thought that their supporting cast, the Warriors supporting cast, also stepped up in a way that's going to be really important for them if they're going to be successful in the playoffs. I got to admit to you, Chance, like I went into that game with some arrogance on the Rockets' behalf. And I came away like thinking, a lot of this was a little bit of bravado and sarcasm on my part. You know how we do on the internet, kind of joking around, but also saying like, hey man, I think both of these teams could be food. I understand who the Warriors are. You don't have to introduce me to them. I get it. But I like just the matchup and what the Rockets have represented this year. And I went into it like, man, look, Memphis, Golden State, Rockets in 5, like jokingly. but either team is food, right? And a lot of that had to do, just to kind of explain that, a lot of that had to do with the way both teams finished their seasons. Memphis more so on a longer stretch of not being that good toward the end of the season. Obviously, they fired their coach, and then even Golden State to a degree, losing to the Rockets with the season on the line or with seeding on the line, losing to the San Antonio Spurs in their own Harrison Barnes with seeding on the line, losing in that game, which was a classic by regular season standards to end the season with the Clippers, but losing that game with seeding on the line, I like, man, look, the way that they're playing, I like the Rockets' chances. I came away from it reminded of how dangerous
Yeah.
the Warriors actually can be. I'm curious of what your main takeaway was watching the game.
No, that's funny to me. If saying that, you thought that the Warriors or Grizzlies could be food. I will say that going into that game, I thought that, not just the game, but just kind of the stretch around the season as the Rockets kind of awaited to see like who they might play. And of course, you didn't know until the play-in. I thought that the Grizzlies, if I'm being honest, were the only team that I felt really good about like their chances, right? But if I can't say that I thought the Warriors or the Grizzlies would be food because the Rockets haven't proven to me that they know how to chew, right? Like this is their first time in the postseason, and so and we'll talk more about this there. But that's the thing that like it's the fear of the unknown, right? Like I don't know how they'll respond in the postseason. What happens if they drop game one and now they face a must-win game in game two, or Warriors still won at in game two, and now they have to go back to Golden State, where it's not the same, or was that where it was a couple years ago in that original arena, but like to where it is now. It's a tough place to play when Steph gets going and the crowd gets into it, right? Or like I don't know how they'll respond because only two of their starters in Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet have ever been in the postseason before, and so we'll talk more about that as I mentioned. But as far as Golden State goes, like like Jimmy Butler, it was absolutely sensational. It's a reason why they went out to go get him, and he certainly filled in that role. And then Steph was Steph when when the money was on the line, and so that is my biggest concern for a team that once again I don't know. How, it's once again the fear of the unknown. I don't know how they'll look. I don't know how they respond. I will say I feel much better in who their leader is and who their head coach is in Ime Udoka because he's going to have them play fearless. If it was maybe just somebody else, a different coach who just was maybe an X's and O's guy, and but like if you're scared, go to church. Is how Ime Udoka kind of runs this team. Clearly, we saw it when they were in Golden State as he barked at Steph on his way off the court. Who does that? As a head coach, Ime Udoka does, and so they have kind of this fearless mentality that I'm really excited to see. But yeah, like we saw the Grizzlies do what they do in the clutch, and ultimately come away with that win.
Hey, I knew Udoka was for real. Was it last season when he told LeBron stop acting like a bitch or something like that? It was something to that effect that was probably far beyond what I would even suggest. Somebody, limits that they might go with LeBron, especially in that kind of setting. But that's what he's about. I can respect it.
6'6", when you're 6'6", probably 230, you can get away with that. Maybe you and I can't. You know what I'm saying? I'm a good 6 feet. 200. On a good day.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're not trying them games. And yeah, no, that seems to be though just what his personality is. And I think that the team by and large, I think both you and I can probably attest to this being around, the team has adopted that and is reflected in that, or that's reflected in the team when you watch them. So let's get into this matchup then, without further ado. What do you think about this matchup against the Warriors for the Rockets? What do you feel like the Rockets' chances are, and what will be key for them going up against the Warriors in this series?
Well, I'll tell you this. When the game ended last night, and we knew it was officially that the Warriors will be playing the Rockets, I didn't feel great about it. If I'm keeping it a bug with you, and there for a couple of reasons. And I'll say this: I can understand why, even after they won, 50 plus games, second seed in the West, I can understand why they're underdogs. And once again, it's some of that is the unknown. But when I woke up this morning, I was like, I don't know. So here's my thing. When I look at playoff series, there are a few factors that help me determine whether or not I'll pick that team or not. I look at who has the best player in the series. That check goes to the Warriors. And on top of that, I don't even know if that's at the Rockets. They have the second best player in the series. I look at experience, and clearly there's a gap in that as well. And then here's my thing: when when it comes to the postseason, most of these games, particularly in the Western Conference, and if you're in the East, especially as you get to the semifinals and the finals, when it's closing time, who do you trust more? To me, I look at it, and this is why I was going back to my point earlier about how I didn't feel as great. I only felt great about maybe the Grizzlies because you had to deal with Ja, but he's not as much of a known closer as if you playing with the Lakers. Whether it's obviously you have to deal with LeBron, but Luka, who's one of the best closers, if not the best closer in the league. If it's Denver, you got to deal with Jokic. If it's the Warriors, you got to deal with Steph, and you have to deal with Jimmy. And shoot, we know at least one time a series, Draymond Green is good from the corner with less than a minute left. We've seen that movie play out a number of times. And my concern for the Rockets is the Rockets don't even know who their closer is. I don't know who their closer is, neither do the Rockets. And we've seen that multiple times this season to where you would think, it's supposed to go to maybe Jalen Green, and he's on the bench during winning times. We know, okay, if not him, is it LP? Maybe he's on the bench. And to me, that's concerning that if these games are going to be close, right? Like, especially, as you get maybe game one, they get after them. Okay, cool. But game two, game three, game four, there's going to be games about, who do you turn to late? And I don't know who that answer is. And right now, I don't know if the Rockets do. And to me, that's extremely concerning. And the reason why, once again, I can see why the Warriors are favored. With that being said, I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom for the Rockets. I do think they hold some matchup advantages. And starting with, first of all, their size. The double big lineup has worked throughout the season, and that's something that I think they can take advantage of against the Warriors. We saw Zach Edey pound them for 17 rebounds yesterday, and even in the Grizzlies' loss. I look at their athleticism. I look at their depth. One thing that I think they can take advantage on the Warriors is they're not a very deep team. The guy who they drafted in that same draft class is Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga. He's not even seen the floor. Didn't play at all yesterday, and a guy that you wasted a lottery pick on, you had high ups on, he can't see the floor whatsoever. So you have a number of bodies you can throw at Jimmy Butler and Steph. And we saw what Amin Thompson did to Steph Curry the last time they played them. And it was arguably one of his worst games of his career. I don't think that's not lost on me. I'm not just chucking it up as just an anomaly. But once again, those to me, it comes down to, the three factors that are really important to me: the experience, the best player, and who do I trust in the clutch. There's a gap on all those between the Rockets and the Warriors, but I also see clear advantages. I have to weigh which one do I value more. And right now,
Yeah, I get it. I get it, and it makes sense. It's logic. I would say that for me, and this is just me talking here, I have been on a unleash Jalen Green, unleash Alperen Sengun. I asked them about this, I think, or maybe it was somebody else that actually asked it, but I remember being in the locker room once when Alperen Sengun was asked about closers and this exact thing that you bring up. And he was just saying, and what is he supposed to say in a situation like this? But he's saying matter of factly, like, no, it's me, it's Jalen Green, it's the two of us who are the guys. And I was able to appreciate and respect that he was sort of taking ownership of that, not kind of feeding into the narrative, oh, hey, it's a committee of closers. Like, no, it's on us. We're the guys, and we're the guys that need to be out there closing the game. Now, what you bring up is interesting because, hey, what's that going to look like if they're not having their best night? And we know that Ime Udoka has a tendency to go with the hot hand, either go with the hot hand or go against the cold one, if you know what I mean. So, like, if you're not getting it done, then you're on the bench, and maybe it's Aaron Holiday out there in moments where you would prefer to see your supposed stars out there. So, like, I think that's a valid concern, but I also feel like just kind of my response to it is, hey, man, you got to sink or swim with those guys because you're not going to – I don't think that you're going to get it done on a consistent basis without them having those experiences and without relying on them at some point in that way. So – in some ways, it's house money. I know they don't view it that way because the opportunity is in front of them. But just the way I view it is, you got to sink or swim with those guys. Like the answer to that question that I think you and I both probably share the question, but the answer has to be those guys. So, like for me, that's going to be when you talk about what's key in the matchup and like how they're going to get it done. That's a big part of it. I was asked this on Sports Radio 610. I just did the Rockets report on the drive with Clint Sterner and Ron Show Hughley, and Ron was asking me, like, what do you think is, or what do you feel most confident in the Rockets going forward in this series, and what do you what do you have the most trepidation about? And my thing was, hey, I feel the most confident in the identity of the team defensively and the fact that I feel like those attributes will translate. I do think that the defense that we've seen throughout the season is real, and like top 5 defense is real, and that's something that can translate not just stylistically, but personnel wise. As you just mentioned, they got multiple bodies that they can throw at the key guys for the Warriors. Like you can guard. You mentioned Amin Thompson shutting down Steph Curry, him having, I think, what was the worst game of his career, if not certainly one of the worst. Man, you got Amin Thompson that has shown the ability to hold his own against Steph Curry, if not even better than that. And man, you got any mix of Dylan Brooks, Tari Eason, and I mean, you name it, like what Jabari Smith can give you in versatility. And Jalen Green, even as somebody who's not known as a defender, but is athletic and I think tries a lot harder on defense under Ime Udoka than he did earlier in his career. Like you got a lot of options defensively to throw at their key guys that I think can make things really difficult on the Warriors. And I think that that's something that they can replicate on a night-to-night basis. That is not something to sneeze at. And then, so I would say that's the thing I feel greatest about. But what I feel I would say most uneasy about would feed into what you're talking about. And that's the fact that not just have you not seen it yet from Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, because I'm much more willing to entertain the idea that I just haven't seen it yet, but it could still be real. Maybe I'm about to see it. But man, even against the Warriors, and I'm curious what you think about this, even against the Warriors specifically, those guys just have not been good enough. And I mentioned this on the show earlier when I was, talking about this with the drive. Like Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, save for the most recent game with Sengun against the Warriors, overall, those guys have not played up to their averages against the Warriors. They have not exactly shown up. They played these guys 5 times, okay? And the Warriors won 3 out of the 5. But in the majority of them, you're not getting the type of performance from Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun that I think is going to be required from them in the playoffs if they're to be taken seriously. And that would be the thing that I think is what I would say I'd be most uneasy about for the Rockets, but also is very much key in them flipping the narrative.
I agree. To answer your question as far as what's wrong with them against the Warriors, I don't know. I really don't. And we'll get a chance to obviously look at that over the next couple of weeks when they take them on over the offseason. I mean, over the postseason. But to me, I think on the flip side, them not necessarily having a guy, I think what kind of does go in their favor is like, yeah, they do have options, right? Like Dylan Brooks can give you, and I'm not encouraging it, and I wouldn't bank on it, but like
be careful, man. If Rockets Twitter get a hold of this and they say you advocating for Dylan Brooks being their closer, man, they're gonna come for your head.
Don't put words in my mouth. I did not say anything about a closer. I said it could be a time in the game where maybe he gives you, maybe 20 points a game, or Jabari explodes and is able to get hot from deep, and just they don't really necessarily feed Jabari, just let him go to work. But if he's able to hit shots, and the other thing I thought about too, like we kind of the narrative has been about Amin Thompson guarding Steph and what he was able to do. But what if Amin actually like is one of their best offensive weapons in this series? What if he explodes for them and is able to be a creator, and as far as getting to the rack and creating and scoring and also dishing to his teammates.
Chance, not to cut you off, man, but it's not like we haven't seen them design plays for Amin Thompson at the end of games. They've gone away from it a little bit, but it's something that they've done, and it's something that's also worked out for them at times. So it's not like it's something that we haven't seen before.
If anything, like I'll probably, if I'm being honest, I'll probably feel more comfortable with an Amin Thompson pick and roll or trying to get him to beat somebody off the dribble and create for others and create an open shot for somebody than I do necessarily Jalen Green going to work. Like, if I'm being honest, in a late game situation, this is based off of, what I've seen as far as shot selection, and just, maybe finding the right guy. I feel a little bit more comfortable with the men doing that. Like if you give me like one possession of who I really have who's hands wherever they have the ball in. To me, I'd even lean them in. But yeah, it's like, our also too, can you set something up for LP in the post? But the thing is like we know a lot of times in late game situations you might double unless it's maybe Draymond Green who might just you play him straight up. So that's the thing of like once again the unknown with this Rockets team of like and we haven't even touched about Fred VanVleet, who he may clearly and deservedly so feels very comfortable and trust in a late game situation. He's kind of similar to a men in the situation of it's not necessarily he might take the shot, but can he create something to set somebody else up for that? Instead of just like you would do with Minnesota. Hey, look, we're gonna put the ball in Ant-Man's hands, and he's going to take the last shot, right? If you're the Lakers, if Luka gets the ball in the clutch, he's going to take the shot. The Rockets have options of whether it's specifically with Alp, Amin, same thing with Fred. That if the ball's in their hands late, it feels like more about we're going to try to get the best shot versus if it's in Jalen's hands, it's probably going up.
So you mentioned Jabari earlier, and we'll come back to Amin in a second because I do want to ask you about the recent Defensive Player of the Year campaign for Amin Thompson. We're going to do that in just a second. But before we do that, I actually did want to ask you about Jabari, especially since you just brought him up. Is that someone that you could see playing a big factor in this series? And you and I have both been watching this. Like, it stands out to me, Chance, at least, how he has seamlessly transitioned into that role of, hey, I don't even want to call him a bench guy because it feels like it minimizes the point that I'm really trying to make. Like, just the lineup flexibility, the skill set being what it is, the fact that, and I've been talking about this a lot, but the fact that he makes sense in any lineup, Chance. Yep. He makes sense in any lineup that Ime Udoka could come up with, whether they're doing the double big that you mentioned earlier as a potential big three, a big wing is what I mean, or if they're going small, they're stretch 5, stretch 4. If it's a kind of a more traditional lineup, like from 3 to 4 to 5, whatever lineup they sort of can imagine, he makes sense in it. And if he's right, man, he's somebody that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, but I think is a potential X factor for the Rockets on both ends of the floor. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head on a number of different things regarding Jabari Smith, because I think when Jabari got drafted, of course, he was originally supposed to be the number 1 overall pick, and then he slid to the Rockets like literally the night of, right? Like he thought he was going to Orlando.
Remember,
and
yep.
I think Rockets fans thought, hey, look, we got the who we thought was supposed to be the number 1 overall pick, and I think they thought they were getting Paolo. But like, hey, look, we'll take it because he's such a talented player, and I think that over his first couple of years in the league, there was a little bit of a disappointment because when you're drafted that high, naturally, usually if you're a top 3 pick, you're expected to be somewhat of a star, unless it's just considered a bad draft. You're supposed to be in star type of territory, and it seemed like he just adjusted to the role of a role player. But I think once you get over the fact that like he's not that guy, at least within this offense, as his Rockets team is currently constructed, you realize he has a ton of value. And to me, like when you think about some of these trades that people were throwing out there, as far as like for a potential superstar to come in with this Rockets team, seemed like Jabari Smith was kind of just thrown in there. It's like, hey, like he's a good prospect also too, like But here's the thing: 6'10" guys who can guard 2 through 5 and can shoot the ball at a high clip, they do not grow on trees. And one thing about Ime Udoka, even dating back to his days, in Boston, he likes a big that can space the floor and that can guard. And Jabari Smith checks those boxes. Find me 3 or 4 of those guys in the league that can do that. They just don't have them. And as you just mentioned, he provides a certain level of flexibility and versatility that you really just can't go out there and replace if you just go ahead and just dump him just because you felt like he wasn't living up to your expectations. And that's me directing that towards some Rockets fans who are willing to do that. So with that being said, like, yeah, he certainly can be an X factor for this Houston team. But another guy who we haven't talked about is Tari. A guy who you can sick on, Jimmy or Steph. And he's a guy who like doesn't get buckets traditionally. He's not a guy who, tween hezzy, jumper. like he's a guy who gets a lot of his points in transition and kind of beating a guy off the bounce maybe and powering his way to the hole, finish or offensive rebounding. But it's funny, like you can look at some of his games and before you know it, you're like, damn, Tari got 22. How'd that happen? Right?
Yeah.
He's a guy who I think both Jabari and Tari, like the Ari bros, you're gonna count on. And I think like if Jalen Green doesn't give you, and I think it's asking a lot to ask Jalen to go band for band with Steph, and I wouldn't depend on that. But and if he can give you some games to where he looks like the guy that you drafted him to be, and he's having a good game. But if he's not, it's going to take Jabari and Tari, to maybe fill in some of that void for the Houston Rockets.
Man, I'm glad you mentioned Tari though, and we did, throw him out there as like one of those defensive options. How, it's just this litany of possibilities of guys that they could throw at you if you got a perimeter scorer from like a men being the guy, but the cast of Dylan Brooks, Tari, and Jabari, and I mentioned Jalen, like that's out there. But I would say, man, I've been sitting next to you at times at Toyota Center when I've seen Tari, like his ball handling has improved. I think, like, well, he'll do, like, he's got a little bit more of a bag now than I think he had when he first got in. That is to me noteworthy. Now, it's not like they're going to be drawing up plays for Tari or expecting him to go off the way he is capable of. But it is worth noting that he's capable of it. So, like, I think that you're spot on with those two. Jabari again, man. Like, I'm right there with you. Like, once you get over, this is a good point. Once you get over the idea of, okay, maybe he's not gonna be an All NBA guy per se, and maybe he even makes more sense for you coming off the bench. That's okay. That's okay, especially if he provides the kind of value that you and I are both here talking about to the team. And okay, if your team is good enough to make up for the fact that your number 3 overall pick didn't necessarily turn out to be a superstar, that you've got a bunch of dudes picked in the top 4, and maybe even your best player is somebody that wasn't a lottery pick, somebody you traded up for in the first round in Şengün, but wasn't even one of these lottery picks. And you in some ways caught lightning in a bottle in that way. Like, you've done a good enough job building an infrastructure that you're able to kind of withstand this idea that, hey, maybe this guy is a useful player, but not necessarily a superstar. So that's credit again, I think, to an earlier point that you were making about the Rockets and their overall scouting and team building and talent acquisition and tanking and being in a situation where they could pick players like that. Like, all of that stuff, I think is super important. All right, man, before we get out of here, man, I got to ask you about the Amen Thompson Defensive Player of the Year case. And if you're on this, what do you think? What do you think about Amen Thompson's case for Defensive Player of the Year, given how much he's able to affect the game, both on the perimeter and as like a wing who's a rim protector? Like, normally it's like one or the other, but or you'll have a big who's like switchable, who like maybe he's a rim protector, but he can also guard on the perimeter, but he's not out there necessarily shutting down your best perimeter player. And then vice versa, an athletic wing who maybe can block some shots, but he's not considered a rim protector. This dude is kind of a do-it-all type of defensive weapon that is, I think, just rare. I think that's a fair way to put it. Probably just a rare type of athlete and defensive player. Are you in on this Defensive Player of the Year stuff with Amen Thompson? And like, how do you view the season that he's had and the impact, I should say, that his defense has on this team's overall potential and trajectory?
Yeah, the fact that we're even discussing this in year 2, I think, is insane. The fact that we're talking about, hey, is this guy the best defensive player in the entire association? And I think when they drafted him, people thought like he had the potential to be that type of guy, but I don't know if they thought it was going to be this soon and this early. Like, just because you're not supposed to be there, right? Like, even if you have the tools, you might have to figure things out. You might have to develop the IQ to be in the right spot at the right time. But that's the thing about a man is he's just so gifted athletically. He doesn't have to be. He can just use his God-given ability just to make up when he gets beat. The rare times he gets beat, and then he beats it the other way, and the Houston Rockets are off to the races, right? As far as his case, I think he has real opportunity, clearly, right? Like there's been a national like because we can say, hey, he deserves to get it all we want to, but like neither one of us have votes. But it's been interesting though that people who do are like, I really like this kid from Houston. He's got my vote, and so I would not be surprised if when it's announced he gets it, and as Ime Udoka said, I like his chances a lot more than the other guy, who they'll be facing off with, and that would be Draymond Green. But obviously, he has some competition in Draymond. Dyson Daniels also had a really nice defensive season, and the job he's been able to do as far as leading the league in steals, setting records. Like it's been crazy what he's been able to do. But yeah, like to me, what stands out about Amin is his versatility, right? Like because he can guard so many different positions, so many different types of players. The fact that he can guard, Steph Curry, on one night, and then a super athletic wing on the next. Like that's like it's rare. And then like he can like actually put you in jail. Like what he did to Steph Curry, nobody else has done that. Where Steph is left flustered and frustrated. Like and he admitted to it after the game of like, yo, this guy like he's different. And so he certainly deserves the love that he's getting. If he doesn't get it, he for sure will be a first team, all NBA defensive, all defensive guy. To me, it's like, okay, cool. Like, how far can he take this thing? Is he going to be a perennial defensive player of the year? And he certainly has the tools to be that. But also, like, how does his offensive game continue to develop? Right? Like, as I mentioned, like, it's look, if he can take Steph out the game, then Houston Rockets they'll win the series. But what if he adds more to that on the offensive end? Then we really might be talking about a guy who, like, yeah, like, is there in fact their best player? And with that pick we talked about earlier, they can maybe add to it or do something, continue to add to this roster of young star potential. I'm super excited, not just for this upcoming series, but for the seasons to come for this young team.
Yeah, so I know Ime Udoka was joking with the deadpan on Draymond Green, saying that Albert or that Amin Thompson's Defensive Player of the Year case was better than Draymond Green's. But I know he was joking, but he is correct. Like to me, I am only but so much. There are only but so many like candidates that I'm willing to look at over Amin Thompson, and it's really just Evan. You didn't mention Evan Mobley.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
But I like Thompson's case over all of these cats except maybe Evan Mobley. Like if he doesn't get it, to me, it's got to be Evan Mobley or no, because like Dyson Daniels, I got him in Thompson over like being more impactful than that. I understand he leads the league in steals, but just from end to end, from baseline to baseline, Amin Thompson is a much more impactful defensive player to me, at least to me, than Dyson Daniels. And then Draymond's case has been propaganda. He's obviously one of the all-time great defensive players that we've ever seen, and is still one of the great ones. He'll be all defensive as well on some level, first team, second team, whatever it is. But he ain't like he's borderline first team. Damn sure ain't over any of those other three that I mentioned. Like to me, it's Amin, Evan Mobley, one of those two. Either way, I'd have Dyson Daniels first, or I'm sorry, third after that. And then Draymond can get in the conversation after those three guys. But if it ain't Amin Thompson, to me, it better damn sure be Evan Mobley, because I think that's the only guy that has to me, even a legitimate case of winning the award over him. All right, I'm going to get you out here on this, man. And I'm doing this. You can't see this, but across from me right now, I got Sean Bajani in the studio, a noted U of H alum, proud Cougar alum. And I know that you have done a really good job of covering U of H, and not just their run this year, but, as long as you've been around, kind of being real connected to that program, what Kelvin Sampson's been doing with U of H. And this year was special. Now, the way it ended was hurtful, I would say, in some ways. Like for as magical of a run as it was, to lose the game in the way that they did, to not get a shot off, I think does put a little bit of salt on it. But man, you were there for the entirety of it and kind of understand the larger picture and just how great of a run this was. I'm curious from you, as somebody that was on the ground and was really covering this team like that, not just when the tournament came, but really from day one. What was that like covering this U of H team, and how would you sort of describe the run that they went on and what all of that symbolizes?
Yeah, to sum it up, it was special, right? It's unfortunate that their season and story finished that way. We're talking about 2 points short of a national championship, but that doesn't diminish or erase the success they had this year. Not just this year, but even going back to, like, let's just take this Big 12 era that has in basketball been dominated by Houston. Like they showed up as a program coming from the AAC and just walked around pimp slapping every program in what's regarded as the one or two or the first or second best basketball conference in America.
Came into
And
their
then
trap and took their trap.
what? And the fact that listen, they go on the road and go undefeated this season on the road to Kansas, to Arizona, to Texas Tech, to Baylor. These are like, this is a gauntlet of a schedule, and some of the toughest places to play in America, and they just find ways to win. And then they get to the tournament, and they did what good teams do earlier on. They dominated who they were supposed to, and of course that, the first round. Then you take on a Gonzaga team to where realistically they really weren't threatened. They controlled that game throughout. And then Purdue, who you could argue was a Elite Eight matchup, they took them on the Sweet 16, and that was a road game playing up the street from where Purdue's located. They find a way to win that game. They run through a darn good Tennessee team. I mean, they actually absolutely smoked them. And then, of course, the Duke game, which will go down as one of the all time type games, in the within college basketball, and they had that type of comeback, and then ultimately for it to fall short is disappointing. It's just, because it's tough because you have to start all over again next year, right? There's no do overs, new roster, and they'll be good next year. They'll be the preseason number one, but it's tough that their storybook season ended that way, but a successful one nonetheless.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. And I mentioned earlier that you're rooted here on top of the fact that you cover the team. But man, if you're not around or if you don't have the context, it's hard to describe the from here to there story of this program. Like I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s where U of H was regarded as an academic institution, and like it was like people here cared about U of H, but not the athletic program as much. Like they just had kind of a dormant sort of stretch there that just happens to coincide with the time that I grew up. And I know you and I are a similar age, at least. Like the time when we grew up, they were not they were just not like that. And then for the last decade or so, what Kelvin Sampson is able to come in and do for just like the overall perception of them as an athletic program. And I know they haven't exactly figured things out in football, but they've had their moments there too. And then this run here with Sampson, it's just a remarkable turnaround for that program as honestly an afterthought. Like I honestly think this has to do with a little bit to do with why they're not covered with the same type of energy, like say a Blue Bud would be, aside from the fact that they're in a big city, but it does still feel like even media is getting used to the idea of U of H being relevant in the way that they are. And credit to yourself and others who have kind of been around and given them the due that they are owed here. But it is for a long time a foreign concept of relevant U of H athletic programs. And now, like it ain't, it's been this way for a decade now. And then they, obviously go to the championship game, had that moment against Duke, like you mentioned, that is going to go down as one of the all-time, probably great all-time NCAA tournament games that you'll remember, that you'll find, especially the whole comeback nature of it. Like you didn't have, especially in a year when you didn't have Cinderellas, you didn't have Cinderella stories, but I'll be damned if your number one seeds didn't give you some compelling moments, right? And U of H being chief among them in that moment. So, yeah, man, a letdown, but I would say credit to you for kind of being out there and just, for the hell of it, shout out to U of H and all the Cougs out there, keeping up that energy. And, it is cool to have a a college program, a college athletic program that is relevant in this city. You know, in a city that is probably disjointed in a lot of ways in terms of fan bases, but probably none more than college with all the colleges around. It feels like whether you went to U of H or not, you're able to kind of get around like who doesn't respect, who wouldn't respect their story, you know, even if you went to Rice, even if you went to Sam Houston State like I did. I know you went to Arizona State. Like, even if you don't have an actual connection to their program, you can't help but to like recognize game or just like acknowledge and respect what it is that they've done, the sort of bootstraps pulling up that they've done, if you will, with that program. And it's been impressive.
I appreciate that. And, you know, really quickly to that, it's funny that you say that because, yeah, and not just within the city of Houston, as far as like maybe if you're not connected with U of H, just naturally wanting to see them do well and succeed. I've also found it absolutely fascinating that, as I mentioned, how they came to the conference and have just bullied everybody. It's been really interesting to see that, like, they go on the road and they beat these teams, and the teams are like, yeah, man, that's a darn good team over there. Like, I have nothing to, I can't do anything but respect it, right? And as they went on the run, Big 12 teams like Texas Tech fans, Kansas, like there's Kansas, like a huge following, like a Kansas Twitter accounts. They're like, man, I hope U of H pulls it off. What team do you know has their in-conference rivals saying, man, I hope they do it? And it's something that I think it definitely starts with Kelvin Sampson because he's it's funny to say that now. He's so likable, and like teams respect, as you mentioned, game recognized game. They respect what he's built here and the way that they play. And Kelvin definitely, you know, shows love and respect right back to those programs. But it was like I was seeing other programs accounts saying, like, mentioning U of H fans say, hey man, sorry about that. I was really rooting for you guys. I was hoping you pulled it off as far as pride for the conference. I ain't gonna lie to you, as an Arizona State fan, I hope Arizona gets bounced the first round every single time. You will never see me rooting for them. You know what I mean? But it just kind of is what it is, you know. So it's been pretty cool to see that momentum from the Houston Cougars.
Chance, man, I missed you at the Nick Caserio press conference this afternoon earlier, man. I know you, as we mentioned earlier, are a free agent, so you kind of dictating your own schedule these days. But go ahead and tell. I've seen you do a little bit with Cron.com on some freelance stuff with some videos, some social media stuff that I think is really kind of particular to you and your personality and skill set. That I was real like excited to see you kind of dabbling in that a little bit. Just tell the people what you're up to these days, where to find you, anything you want to promote out there, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, as you mentioned, I'm a free agent, kind of doing my own thing. You can find me on X at Chancellor TV, but definitely really building some of the other social media accounts. So follow me on TikTok, and that's at same at Chancellor TV. Same thing on Facebook. You know, I'm kind of new. It's funny, I'm new to this Facebook thing. I've never really had a page before, but you know, now that I'm not at KPRC anymore, everything's digital, right? And I know a lot of people get their news from digital sites. So that's where you can find me. Usually Chancellor TV across all platforms. But please, you know, I'd probably say go like and subscribe, or like and follow my Facebook page. Same thing with Twitter. Excuse me, Twitter, TikTok. Get at me on there, and as I'm producing some exclusive content for that. So, you know, I appreciate you for having me on, man. I really thought this was a fun and informative conversation. You know, and you know how I feel about you, man. Like, you know how I feel about when we get together and chop it up. You know, I think, you know, it's always a good time, and you know, I'm excited to see the Rockets as they get through this series, and maybe we run this thing back, you know, for the Western Conference semifinals. So appreciate you for having me on.
No doubt, man. Chance, you've been generous with your time, man. So I appreciate that. And look, we'll be in the building, man. Like I will see you soon. We'll be at Toyota Center, man. Look, and I didn't mention this, but like the first post-COVID playoff series at Toyota Center, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and we'll get to be in the building for that. Like, I have been excited for that ever since it became clear that the Rockets were going to be for real. They were going to be in the mix in some form or fashion. So I look forward to that, man. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon, man. I appreciate you.
My man. Thanks, bro.
All right, later. That is my guy, Chancellor Johnson, formerly of KPRC Channel 2, KPRC Channel 2, the NBC affiliate here in Houston. But as I mentioned, man, a free agent, but still doing this thing. On the ground, doing some reporting, some social commentary, social media commentary, I should say. That's pretty good, man. So check him out. I also appreciate y'all for being a part of this episode. I hope y'all enjoyed that conversation with Chance. I know I did. Make sure that you are subscribed to the B Block Podcast, specifically Foolish Club Media now. And look, I'm not ashamed to admit this. I want y'all to subscribe and download over there, because that's what, a lot of the payoff, if you will, of doing this is tied to and associated. I'm not too ashamed to admit that. So go ahead and make sure that you support what Foolish Club Media is doing over there, and the B Block Podcast as well. Thanks to Chancellor Johnson for joining the show, and to you for watching, listening, however it is that you got this episode. And until next time, y'all be good.